Welcome to Lesson 4 of Sport and Society. This is the introduction to how the middle classes helped in the development of sports like association football and lawn tennis. So we're going to look at how those sports developed, and we're also going to have a little look at track and field athletics as well. You need to make notes in your blue exercise books just to make sure those books are in order. You should already have the industrial factors affecting rational recreation on A3 paper, those big A3 sheets that we had. They can now be stuck into your blue exercise books, or if you prefer to make clear notes on them, that's fine as well. You've also been given a sheet in class to make some notes about the role of the middle classes, or again, if you prefer to write those notes straight into that exercise book, you can. So by the end of this session, you should be able to explain the role of the middle classes in the development of association football and lawn tennis, explain the developments of track and field athletics, and I want you to listen very carefully and add any extra notes that you think need taking. So we're going to develop some skills of listening and note taking as well. So let's have a look first of all at the middle classes. The middle classes played a massive role in the development of organised sports. If you think about games like rugby and football, like we know them today, rationalised sport that's ordered and organised, the middle classes played a huge role in that. Remember, during the industrial period, we had a three-tier society. What I'd like you to do in your exercise books or on your sheet is to write down what those three tiers were. So if you remember, in pre-industrial Britain, it was a two-tier society. Things changed when we saw industrialisation and the Industrial Revolution. What were those three tiers known as? You can pause the video if you like while you write those down. So the three tiers, we still had the upper classes, the gentry, the people with lots and lots of money, they still existed. But we had this new middle class who'd emerged, these people who were making money from these new industries. And there at the bottom, newly named the working class. So the working class would have been the people working in industry, in the factories, in the mills and things like that. They didn't have a lot, they didn't have a lot of money. So who were the middle classes then? And we're going to review this a bit more in class next week. But the middle classes were the self-made businessmen. So they'd taken advantage of all these new industrial opportunities. They went on to kind of make money through manufacturing and things like that. Their dads, but the fathers had probably been the ones to initiate this kind of new industry and these new business opportunities. And as a result, the sons of these fathers were educated at the fee-paying public schools. So remember, these were the boarding schools that you paid to go to, and obviously then went on to universities like Oxford and Cambridge. It was at these schools that they experienced organised sport. So they experienced sport with boundaries and rules and officials and strict numbers on teams. They had much less money than the upper classes, so far less than the upper classes, but because they were educated and they were entrepreneurs, so they were finding new creative ways to make money, it allowed them to take up prominent roles in society. So some of the middle classes were the factory or the mill owners. Some of them went on to be the officers in the army. Some of them were the clergy, so the vicars and the priests in the church. So the middle classes, like I say, they'd experienced this rational sport at public school, enjoyed it, they'd seen all the good that could come out of it, that muscular Christianity, that healthy body, that healthy mind, the athleticism, the physical endeavour and the moral integrity, and they saw that they could do good with that sort of sport. So it's the middle classes who set up the national governing bodies. They wanted everybody to play to the same rules. They wanted they'd already banned the mob games, but they didn't want to return to that. So the middle classes supported the development of rational recreation by setting up the national governing bodies, things like the FA. They codified the sport and wrote down the rules. They set up clubs and they developed competitions and leagues. All of these increased opportunities for the working classes to take part in association football. What roles they played in the development of association football. So we're going to go through each kind of job, I suppose, that they had and what role they had in developing it. The image that you can see on your screen there is the Cambridge University football team in 1894. They just played Oxford and they'd won 3-1. So some of these boys had been middle class boys, had been to the public schools and the universities, and it was from this experience that they developed leagues and competitions. So now, rather than having occasional play with popular recreation, we've now got regular play. Some of these middle class men went into the church to be the clergy. So they went on to have jobs in the church. So they were vicars and priests, and they provided the working classes with a space to play. Remember, we've talked about it in class. They provided land, the fields around the church. They set up the Sunday school teams. They provided the church halls. All of a sudden, the working class have got a place to play. If we look at the factory owners, so some of them went on to be factory owners. This is all new. This is all knowledge that you already know. So some of the factory owners set up the factory teams and they provided facilities and pitches. Again, a place to play or somebody to watch. They provided the workers with extra leisure time, so they gave them a half day off on a Saturday. And on that half day Saturday, people would go and watch their factory team play another factory team. So they had time to play sport or time to watch sport. For the really good footballers in the factory owners, the middle class factory owners would set aside time for those footballers to train and play matches. They'd still pay them, that was the broken time payments, but with that training time, they could focus on improving their skills and fitness. And those broken time payments, so they pay them to work on the factory floor, but actually they were out there training, signalled the start of professionalism. We started to see standards driven up and the sport became much more appealing to the working classes. The factory owners also saw that success was widely recognised, so they were dead motivated to bring together the best teams possible so that their factory could get the most success. Philanthropists. So I know we've talked about this in class. So these were very charitable men of the middle classes who had lots of time and money, and they used that time and money to improve life for the working classes. The man that you can see there is a man called Joseph Livesey, and he was a local philanthropist in Preston, and we're going to talk in class about how he had an impact on the development of public parks and facilities where football and things like that could be played. Meant that we had more pitches, so more places for people to play. The playing pool increased, so there were more opportunities, there were better standards, and the people getting to the very top were just getting better and better and better. And that's where we started to see the very top players going on to become professionals. So the national governing bodies were set up by the middle classes, so things like the FA, because the middle classes wanted to control the sport and control society. They wanted a disciplined, a healthy workforce. They didn't want people up to no good in society. So they set up the national governing bodies almost as a form of control. They were really needed because more and more clubs were forming, more competitions were developing. The FA started to codify the rules for association football. So everybody, whether you were in Manchester or Liverpool or down in London, you were all playing to the same rules. And this meant that teams could travel to different areas to play an even bigger pool of players of an even higher ability. So standards kept driving up. The middle classes also set up competition structures such as the FA Cup. So there were more fixtures, more competitions, and sport just became more popular and more competitive. Factors that led to the development of specific sports. So if we have a look at association football, what you might want to do is listen for a minute, pause the video, and then take the notes. But I'm just going to go through the factors that led to the development of association football. So urbanisation is the first one. So when people moved from the countryside to the towns, there was a lack of space. So we had purpose-built facilities being built. Terraces started to house the high spectator demand. Remember, the factory owners and the factory X gave increased leisure time, so people had more time off to watch and play sport. Saturday afternoon was the traditional 3 o'clock kickoff. The working class were paid more by the factory owners, so they had more money to pay for the gate money to get into the terraces and pay for the transport, the trains to watch. Transport increased, so the development of trains enabled fans to watch away fixtures. There were more regular matches and leagues and competitions formed. Communication improved with the newspapers, so we saw the development of association football and sporting heroes and results being reported on. Professionalism, so people got opportunities to play football as a job via the broken time payments that the factory owners gave them. And we had increased organisation. So the ex-public schoolboys set up the FA in 1863. So we had nationally codified rules, meaning the game was more controlled and less violent. Development of lawn tennis. So in lawn tennis, the middle classes formed the national governing body, the Lawn Tennis Association, and they supported the codification of tennis and developed rules and equipment and clubs. So they were very posh, the tennis clubs in the kind of middle class areas. You had to pay a fee to join them. You had to have the right equipment, etc. The middle classes, or as part of the industry, there was a guy called Major Wingfield, and he produced a tennis kit that you could buy and play in your garden. And don't forget, the middle classes lived in these lovely big townhouses. So the middle classes had the money to buy the equipment that they could then play in the suburban gardens, or they could pay the money to go and join the club. The middle classes developed competitions and tournaments and leagues for tennis. And it was one of the few games that supported women because it was one of the games that both sexes could play together. It was a very social game, and it was considered suitable because the females could wear their very long dresses to play. Developments of track and field events. So we're looking at kind of at the introduction of athletics. So remember, industrialisation and urbanisation, the people moved en masse, a huge population needed entertaining, and track and field became really popular in urban areas. Most major cities had purpose-built tracks by the mid-19th century. Walking and running races would take place on set distances on race courses, and they could attract massive numbers, so 2,500 spectators, and wagering, betting was common amongst the spectators. There was races taking place in most major cities. The national governing bodies were set up, so again the middle class ex-public schoolboys formed the national governing body, and the sport became more organised. So the Amateur Athletics Club was formed in 1866. The amateur middle classes ran for enjoyment and to test themselves, and they followed something called the Amateur Code. They believed in athleticism and they banned wagering. They also had a manual labour exclusion clause, so they banned mechanics, artisans and labourers, effectively anybody who was from the working class, from competing. So they kept it very much a game or an activity for themselves. However, in 1880, the Amateur Athletics Association was set up and the exclusion clause was withdrawn. So in 1880, regardless of your class group, anybody could now compete. It was now open to all. There was also improved transport. So because of trains, we could have athletes travelling around the world and the country to compete in championship and Grand Prix events. We started to see professionalism, so the lower classes saw running as an opportunity to make some money and become professionals, because don't forget, betting was common. The public schools developed track and fields. They developed an activity called hare and hounds, which was almost like a game of hunting. So the pupils would chase. There'd be a group of pupils who would be kind of the pack, and they'd chase a pupil who was the fox, and they'd chase them around the school grounds, and eventually the school provided purpose-built running tracks. With women, track and field was not deemed acceptable, and women were excluded, and we'll look at this a bit more in class. It was deemed to be unladylike.